She thought it was just a ride. A quick lift to a friend's birthday party. It was May 19, 1977. 20-year-old Colleen Stan had left her small apartment in Eugene, Oregon, and was hitchhiking her way south to Westwood, California. She was a free spirit, trusting, independent, and used to thumbing rides. It was the 70s after all, and back then, hitchhiking didn't seem like such a dangerous gamble. She turned down 2 rides that day. Something about the drivers didn't sit right. She trusted her instincts. But then a blue Dodge Colt pulled over. Inside were a young couple, Cameron and Janice Hoker, and their infant daughter in the back seat. They looked normal, even wholesome. Colleen smiled. This would be easy. But what she didn't know was that she had just stepped into the hands of a predator, a man whose darkest fantasies were about to become her living nightmare. And once the door shut, it would be 7 years before she'd walk free again. This is the story of Colleen Stan. This is the story of the girl in the box. The ride started out uneventful. Cameron drove. Janice sat quietly, barely speaking. The baby babbled softly in the back seat. They made small talk. Colleen felt at ease. But something was off. Cameron seemed distant, cold. At one point he stopped at a gas station. While Janice and the baby waited in the car, Colleen stepped inside to use the restroom. And that's when it happened. She looked in the mirror and felt a wave of unease. A powerful voice in her head told her, "Run. Right now. Don't go back to the car." But she shook it off. She didn't want to be rude. She told herself she was overreacting. So she got back in. About an hour later, they turned off onto a dirt road. Cameron said he wanted to take a detour to show her some scenic views. That's when he pulled over. Suddenly, Cameron climbed into the back seat and pulled out a handmade device, a heavy wooden box lined with insulation. Before she could scream, he forced it over her head. It was pitch black. She couldn't hear, couldn't speak, couldn't move. She had been abducted, and her life would never be the same. They brought her to their home in Red Bluff, California, a quiet, unassuming house on a suburban street. To neighbors, the Hookers seemed like a typical young couple raising a family. But inside, behind closed doors, was a dungeon of horror. Cameron dragged Colleen into the basement. There, he stripped her of her clothes and her name. He chained her wrists to the ceiling and left her hanging for hours, naked, exposed, humiliated. Then he placed her inside a coffin-sized wooden box and shut the lid. It was 3 feet long, 2 feet wide, cramped, dark, and silent. And that's where she stayed, for 23 hours a day. Every day. Cameron was not just a kidnapper. He was a sexual sadist with elaborate fantasies of total control. He called Colleen his slave, forced her to refer to him as master. He beat her, starved her, electrocuted her, gagged her, whipped her, bound her. He invented new ways to keep her isolated and broken. And every night, he locked her in that box, beneath his bed, like a hidden secret no one could see. But the most disturbing part wasn't the physical torture. It was the mind games. Cameron told Colleen she was now the property of a secret underground organization called The Company, a group that monitored slaves across the country. They were everywhere, he said. They were watching. If she tried to escape, they would kill her. If she disobeyed, they would punish her family. He told her stories of other girls who tried and were found dismembered. Over time, Colleen believed him. There was no internet back then. No way to fact-check or verify. She had no outside contact. No clocks. No windows. No books. No news. Only what he told her. And so she obeyed. To survive. Cameron Hoker was the kind of monster who hid in plain sight. To his co-workers, he was a quiet mill worker. A little odd, maybe. But nothing more. To his wife Janice, he was a controlling husband with dark desires. Their relationship had started with bondage. She had agreed to indulge his fantasies, up to a point. But after the birth of their daughter, she refused to be his target. So he made a deal. She would allow him to take a slave, if he promised not to touch her again. That slave became Colleen. For Janice, the guilt built slowly. At first, she told herself Colleen was a volunteer, that she had chosen to stay. But over time, the cracks began to show. Cameron didn't stop. He wanted more. He built racks, stretching devices, and restraints. He took photos of Colleen, blindfolded, bruised, bound. He made her sign a contract that gave him complete ownership, body and soul. To him, this wasn't a crime. It was a lifestyle. Years passed. By 1980, Colleen had been in captivity for 3 full years. She spent most of her time in the box. But every now and then, she was let out. To cook, clean, to dig holes in the yard. She was still chained, still silenced, still under the threat of the company. But she could see sunlight again. Eventually, Cameron even allowed her to go outside. She walked in the yard. She did chores. She was even allowed to visit her family once, alone. They thought she had joined a religious cult. She looked thin, pale, and emotionally flat. But she told them she was happy, that she was safe, that everything was fine. She smiled. But behind that smile was a young woman barely holding on. Why didn't she run? Why didn't she scream? Because she believed she'd be killed if she did. And that's the true horror of coercive control. It doesn't chain your body, chains your mind. In 1983, after 7 years, something changed. Janice had finally had enough. Cameron had started talking about taking a second slave, building a bigger dungeon, expanding his empire of control. But Janice couldn't do it anymore. She broke. She sat down with Colleen and told her the truth. There is no company. They're not real. They never were. Colleen was stunned. Everything she believed, everything she'd lived in fear of, unraveled in seconds. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She waited. Days later, Janice drove her to a bus station. Colleen got on and rode home. Just like that. 7 years of captivity. And her freedom returned in silence. But she never told the police. Not yet. For months, Colleen tried to move on. She reconnected with her family, got a job, started therapy. But the scars were deep. She suffered from PTSD, flashbacks, nightmares. She couldn't sleep in beds, couldn't be in dark spaces, couldn't trust men. She was alive, but broken. Meanwhile, Cameron Hoker continued his life as if nothing had happened. He went to work, smiled at neighbors, played with his daughter. He thought he had gotten away with it. Until Janice came forward. Haunted by guilt, she went to the police and confessed everything. She told them about the kidnapping, box, chains, the company, the beatings, the sex acts, the manipulation, and she showed them the evidence. In 1984, Cameron Hoker was arrested. He was charged with multiple counts of kidnapping, false imprisonment, rape, sodomy, and use of a deadly weapon. Janice was granted full immunity in exchange for her testimony. At trial, the defense argued that Colleen had consented, that she stayed willingly, that it was a twisted but consensual relationship. But the jury didn't buy it. They saw the box, photos, the signed contract, the trauma etched into Colleen's face. In 1985, Cameron Hoker was found guilty and sentenced to 104 years in prison. He remains behind bars to this day. He has applied for parole multiple times. Each time Colleen shows up, each time she fights to keep him locked away. She says he should never see freedom again. And who could blame her? Today, Colleen Stan is no longer the girl in the box. She's a survivor, a mother, speaker, counselor. She has spent her life advocating for victims of coercive control and extreme abuse. She has told her story, in interviews, documentaries, and courtrooms, not for fame, but to protect others, to make sure no one else becomes a prisoner of the mind. Her story reminds us that horror doesn't always look like a monster in the dark. Sometimes, it looks like a quiet man with a baby in the back seat, offering you a ride. So the next time someone asks, "Why didn't she run?" remember this. She couldn't see the bars, but they were there, wrapped around her thoughts, woven into her beliefs. Sometimes the most powerful prisons are the ones you can't see. Would you have escaped, or would you have believed the lies just to stay alive? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to Whispers of Crime, where we expose the darkness, give voice to the voiceless, and tell the stories that still echo in silence.